I woke up choking on air that refused to enter my lungs. Fingers were wrapped around my throat, cold and sure, squeezing as if breath were a privilege he could revoke. My vision shimmered at the edges. The chandelier above blurred into a bright smear. Then the grip vanished, and I folded over the vanity, coughing until my ribs ached. When I looked up, the mirror showed a woman I had never met. Sharp brows, pale skin, lips built for dangerous smiles, and a dark bruise blooming on her neck like a cruel signature. A man stood behind me, tall in a tailored black suit, loosened tie hanging like a threat he hadn't finished making. Gideon Rowe's eyes were as flat as a frozen lake. Incense clung to him, the last note of a funeral. His voice came out low and steady, worse than a shout. "Pray she wakes up. If she's hurt because of you, I'll make you suffer." Memory slammed into place the way a door slams in a storm. Serena Vale, legal wife to Gideon Rowe, CEO of Rowe Capital. Liana Hart, his cherished white moonlight, recently returned from abroad. The original Serena had spent the entire novel trying to steal Gideon's attention, copying Liana's gestures, sabotaging her events, and eventually destroying herself. It ended with clinics, hush money, and a narrator who called it inevitable. I had read that book in my previous life on a sleepless night, the kind that followed 14-hour days and coffee that tasted like despair. My heart had stopped at my desk 2 chapters from the end. Now the end had come early, and the opening scene was Gideon's hand around my throat, his anger looking for a target it could easily blame. The ridiculous thing was that once my lungs stopped clawing for air, my first clear thought was not fear. It was irritation. So this is the male lead, I thought, touching the bruise. A man who confuses cruelty with leadership. Then I saw the black card resting on the vanity, the closet beyond stuffed with couture, and the Riverview penthouse sparkling through glass doors, and the irritation turned into a laugh I couldn't swallow. If fate wanted me to play a tragic villainess, it had at least given me a budget for comfort. New rules formed as quickly as bruises. I don't chase men who enjoy watching me beg. I don't compete with a white moonlight for a husband who treats marriage like a contract and affection like a weakness. I don't die for a plot written by someone who thinks jealousy is a personality. I wrapped myself in a robe, covered the lingerie the old Serena had prepared for another humiliating attempt at seduction, and stepped to the window where the city lay glittering like spilled gemstones. "Fine," I whispered to my reflection. "We'll rewrite the script." The accident that started this scene was, in the book, a minor fender bender. Liana fainted from fright, not injury. Gideon, already primed by Serena's past schemes, blamed his wife without evidence. The old Serena responded with tears and clinging, which only confirmed Gideon's disgust. I responded by turning off every notification that connected me to their drama and making distance my first investment. I moved out within 48 hours. Gideon's penthouse had been designed like a showroom for power cold stone, sharp corners, art that looked expensive and unloved. I wanted warmth, anonymity, and an elevator that didn't lead to him. I called a broker, asked for an entire floor downtown, Riverview, sunlit, move-in ready, and paid the deposit before my voice could waver. When I rolled my suitcases across my new hardwood, sunlight caught dust motes in the air like glitter, and the silence felt like a blanket pulled over my shoulders. Then I audited my life. Serena had money that could buy calm if she used it correctly. Her dowry sat in accounts like a sleeping dragon. Gideon's monthly transfers arrived with the regularity of taxes, a chain of zeros that would have made my old self faint. I didn't feel grateful to Gideon for it. The money was the price of keeping the Rowe name polished. I treated it like income and started building a fortress that did not rely on his moods. Next came the landmines. The people Serena had used as tools, private investigators, a driver paid to accidentally appear near Liana's plans, a junior assistant inside Rowe Capital who leaked schedules. Their names in my phone looked like footprints to a crime scene. I sent each one a short message. Contract ended. Paid in full. Do not contact me again, then deleted the threads and blocked the numbers. It felt like wiping a dirty window and suddenly seeing sky. Finally, I opened Gideon's chat history. The old Serena's messages were a museum of humiliation. I made soup. Please come home. I miss you. Tell me what you want and I'll change. Answered mostly with silence. I typed one message and made it boring on purpose. Liana's accident had nothing to do with me. If you have proof otherwise, send it to my lawyer. If you don't, stop accusing me. I've moved out. Contact me only for necessary public obligations. I will not interfere in your private life. and you will not interfere in mine. Pay on schedule, and we can keep things clean. I hit send, changed his contact name to Rowe Payroll, and muted the chat like I was closing a coffin lid. That night, I ordered a seafood tower so absurd it looked like a dare, crab legs like armor, oysters like secrets, lobster that arrived in a cloud of steam. I ate in a sweatshirt with a cartoon pig on the front, feet tucked under me, watching a comedy so stupid it made me wheeze with laughter. When I fell asleep, my throat still hurt, but my mind was quiet. Days became light. Serena had starved herself to fit pastel dresses that looked like apologies. I wore oversized tees, ripped jeans, and sneakers that let me run if I wanted. I explored the city the way I used to scroll through travel photos in my old life. Night markets, smoky grills, street noodles that made my lips tingle. I watched ridiculous movies in my private screening room and cried at melodramas without shame. I joined a boxing class and learned that the sound of my fist meeting a pad could feel like reclaiming a sentence someone tried to rewrite. In boxing class, I met Maya, a nurse who worked night shifts and swore like a sailor. She had no idea who Gideon Rowe was and didn't care. After training, we sat on the curb outside the gym with canned coffee and bruised knuckles, and she asked simple questions that cut through nonsense. Are you safe? Do you have your own money? Do you have people who will show up if you call? I answered, yes, and I'm building that part. She nodded like that was the only answer that mattered. The women's salons still sent invitations. Tea parties where wives measured each other's value by handbag size and husband title. The old Serena attended like a pilgrim seeking grace. I declined. If someone wanted to see me, they could invite me for dinner like a human being. My social circle shrank. My oxygen increased. Gideon didn't contact me for weeks. I celebrated by doing nothing in particular. Peace is a luxury that looks like laziness to people addicted to chaos. Sometimes, late at night, I remembered my previous life with an odd tenderness. The fluorescent office lights, the ache in my shoulders, the way my phone vibrated with messages that always meant more work. I used to imagine what I would do if I had time. Cook, read, sleep, learn a language, watch rain without feeling guilty. This life, absurd as it was, had handed me time in exchange for surviving a narrative. I refused to waste it. I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I had been given a borrowed body with inherited scars. My therapist was an older woman with silver hair and no patience for melodrama. When I described Gideon's hand on my throat, she didn't gasp. She asked, "What boundary will keep you safe next time?" I answered, "No private meetings without witnesses." She nodded and wrote it down like a contract. That practicality saved me more than any inspirational quote ever could. Then came Helena Rowe's birthday, the first obligation I couldn't dodge. In the Rowe family, birthdays were war games disguised as parties. Black tie, hillside estate, chandeliers that could fund a school. I dressed simple and expensive. A black silk dress with clean lines, a scarf, pearl earrings. I looked like someone who didn't need to fight to be seen. The moment I entered, eyes hooked into me. Celeste Quinn, one of Serena's friends. A woman who loved drama the way others loved. Wine glided over. "Serena," she purred, scanning my dress. "So minimal. Did Gideon forget to buy you something? Or is he busy with Miss Hart?" Around her, a cluster of women leaned in, delighted by the scent of blood. I sipped juice and smiled gently. "Celeste, you look glowing," I said. "It's brave to wear foundation that doesn't match your neck." Celeste's smile froze, her hand rising to her collarbone before she could stop it. A laugh escaped from someone behind her, quickly disguised as a cough. I turned to another woman whose diamonds sat too stiffly, like borrowed confidence. "Marla, that bracelet is stunning. I hope the store doesn't miss it." Marla's pupils widened. Then I faced the third, who had begun the whisper chain. "Mrs. Trent, is your son's ethics committee review still ongoing? Plagiarism investigations take so long. You must be exhausted." Silence spread, thick and satisfying. I walked away without raising my voice, leaving them to choke on their own entertainment. If they insisted on playing knives, I was happy to bring a sharper set. Helena Rowe sat at the center like a queen, her gaze already loaded with disapproval. "Why are you dressed so plainly?" she asked. "Do you have no respect for our image?" She nodded toward Gideon across the ballroom, where he stood with Liana at his side. "You should know your place." I kept my smile polite. "You look magnificent, Helena. The room is lit because you're in it. I didn't want to compete with the hostess." She blinked, briefly wrong-footed. I added, still calm, I've already wished you well. I won't disturb your celebration. Then I turned and left the ballroom before anyone could decide whether to stop me. Outside, cold air cut through perfume and gossip. I inhaled and felt something click into alignment. Dignity doesn't need permission. A month later, Gideon appeared at my door on a rainy Saturday. I was in a dinosaur onesie, mid-cry over a tragic romance movie, surrounded by snack wrappers and tissues. The doorbell camera showed Gideon soaking wet, expression carved from stone. I opened because I didn't want my building staff to deal with a billionaire dripping on my threshold like an expensive stray. He stepped inside, took in my chaos, and frowned as if my happiness offended him. My grandfather's 80th banquet is next month, he said. You will attend. Okay, I replied, spooning ice cream like it was a coping mechanism. His gaze sharpened. You agree? I nodded without ceremony. That is what okay means. He hesitated, then asked the question he really wanted to ask. You haven't been bothering Liana. It wasn't a question so much as a suspicion shaped like one. I laughed so hard I almost choked on vanilla. Gideon, I'm busy watching fictional idiots ruin their lives. Your real-life soap opera isn't my hobby. His jaw tightened. Mind your behavior. Don't embarrass the family. I waved my spoon. Sure, Rowe Payroll. He left with his pride intact, and his confusion growing. 2 days after Gideon left, Celeste Quinn texted me from a number I didn't recognize. She attached a photo. An old contract signed with Serena's name, hiring a private investigator to follow Liana. We should talk, she wrote. Your husband might enjoy reading this. I stared at the screen and felt a familiar office life rage rise, someone trying to profit from my vulnerability. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, then replied with one line. Thank you for the evidence. Celeste called immediately, voice sharp. Don't be stupid. I'm offering you a chance to keep this quiet. Quiet? I said, putting the call on speaker while I made tea. You just threatened blackmail in writing. I let her sputter for a few seconds, then added, You have 30 minutes to send a written apology, or you can explain this to a judge. She laughed nervously, thinking I was bluffing. I wasn't. Within a week, my lawyer filed a complaint, and Celeste's social circle learned what happens when you try to bite someone who has decided to stop being prey. The scandal didn't explode. It simply ate her invitations one by one. That kind of punishment lasts longer. The grandfather's banquet was worse than Helena's birthday. Old money, old rules, old men who thought their opinions were law. I wore a wine-red velvet gown, high neck, long sleeves, hair pinned sleek, jewelry understated but undeniably real. I looked like a wife suitable for photographs and unsuitable for manipulation. Dinner seating placed me beside Gideon, as if proximity could manufacture affection. Liana sat at another table but made sure her gaze found Gideon often enough to look tragic. When she approached to toast, her smile was gentle on top and sharp underneath. Gideon, she said, then turned to me. Serena, I want to drink with you too, for grandfather's health. The table's elders watched like judges. Gideon's uncle, a man who worshipped tradition, frowned at my sparkling water. Drink properly. You represent the Rose. Gideon's voice dropped, command heavy. Take the wine. Liana's eyes shimmered, ready to spill tears like stage rain. I set down the water, reached for a clean bowl, and calmly scooped a ladle of the banquet's spicy beef broth, bright red, fragrant with chili and peppercorn. I poured it straight into Liana's wine glass. Chilies bobbed near the rim like tiny flags. The room went silent in a single beat. Gideon surged to his feet, fury cracking his composure. Serena, I wiped a droplet of red from my fingers and met his stare without blinking. You told me to lift the glass, I said evenly. I lifted it. I'm just sharing something I can tolerate. Liana stared at her ruined wine, cheeks drained, lashes trembling. I tilted my head. Miss Hart, you asked to drink with me. Drink. It's a toast. Somewhere, a snort of laughter slipped out and echoed like thunder. Gideon slammed the glass down, broth splattering the linen. He grabbed Liana's arm and marched out, leaving a trail of scandal behind him. I sat back down, picked up my chopsticks, and returned to my crab leg as if I hadn't just detonated a social bomb. The story spread through the city's elite like wildfire. Headlines called me jealous, unhinged, humiliated. People who had never met me delighted in the image of a wife, finally snapping. Gideon did not contact me, but his money still arrived on schedule. Apparently, even rage had a budget line. The next week, a photographer tried to shove a camera into my face outside the gym, asking if I regretted attacking Liana. I kept walking. But Maya, hearing the commotion, stepped between us like a shield and said, "Back up." She had a nurse's tone, the one that makes grown men obey. That night, I upgraded building security, hired a driver for public events, and told my lawyer to keep a list of every outlet that crossed the line. Safety, I had learned, is built in layers. Another day, someone leaked a grainy video from the Rowe penthouse security feed. Gideon's hand at my throat, my body bent over the vanity. The clip was cropped to make it look like a heated couple's fight. The internet reacted the way the internet always does, half outrage, half entertainment. Helena called me screaming that I was destroying the family. Vivian sent a single message. "Are you satisfied now?" I wasn't satisfied. I was furious. Not because my reputation was bruised, but because the world had been handed a piece of violence and treated it like gossip. My therapist asked, "What outcome do you want?" I answered, "Truth." She nodded. "Then decide what truth protects you." I released a short statement through my lawyer. The incident was unacceptable. It would not be repeated, and I was taking legal and personal steps to ensure my safety. I didn't name Gideon publicly. I didn't need to. Everyone who mattered could read between the lines, and everyone who didn't matter could scream into the void. Vivian Vale, Serena's mother, arrived soon after with a gossip magazine in her hand and fury in her mouth. Vivian didn't see daughters. She saw leverage. "You ruined us," she hissed, accusing me of costing the Vale family projects and invitations. She demanded I apologize to Gideon, to Liana, to anyone who could restore the illusion of control. She demanded I get pregnant, as if a child were duct tape for a cracked marriage. I listened, then said, "I will repay the cost of raising me." Vivian blinked. I quoted numbers. Tuition, living expenses, the money Serena's father had treated like investment in a product. "A lawyer will transfer a lump sum to Vale accounts." I continued. "Consider it a buyout. After that, you will not contact me again. If you do, I will publish every detail of how you used me." Vivian's anger collapsed into fear. She called me ungrateful, promised I'd crawl back when Gideon discarded me. I held the door open until she left. After the click of the lock, my apartment felt quiet in a new way, less like emptiness, more like cleared space. With family ties severed, I built a life that didn't need permission. I hired a financial advisor, but I also read and learned until numbers stopped feeling like monsters. I diversified. Conservative funds for safety, calculated risks for growth, and one indulgent venture that made my heart happy, an investment in a struggling community theater. I didn't do it for prestige. I did it because the actors looked like people trying to stay alive through art. And I recognized that hunger. The theater's director was a stubborn woman named June who refused to flatter me. "If you're doing this to look generous," she said, "I'd rather close." I liked her instantly. "I'm doing it because I want good seats and better plays," I replied. June laughed, and the deal became real. Soon my weekends included rehearsals, costume fittings, and late-night ramen with exhausted performers. The crowd there didn't care about the Rowe name. They cared if I showed up when promised. It rewired my brain in the best way. One actor taught me how to fall safely on stage. Another taught me how to project my voice. I learned that confidence can be trained like a muscle. The tabloids kept trying. One claimed I was dating an actor a decade younger. Another claimed I was secretly pregnant. I responded with lawsuits and boredom. My lawyer sent letters. Editors printed retractions. I spent my time learning to cook, because a woman who can feed herself doesn't stay hungry for approval. Liana did not enjoy the shift. The original story had painted her as an innocent victim. Now, with me refusing to play villain properly, she had to work harder for the spotlight. She began appearing at charity events Gideon attended, always, coincidentally, always with fragile smiles. Photos captured Gideon's arm steadying her elbow. Gideon's coat draped over her shoulders. Gideon's gaze softened. The captions wrote their romance for them. One evening, as I left the theater after rehearsal, a woman in a cream coat stepped from a car and blocked my path. Liana. In person, she was prettier than photos' soft features, eyes that looked designed to inspire protection. "Serena," she said quietly, "why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" I asked, adjusting my scarf. The street smelled like rain and stage makeup. Acting like you don't care, she whispered. You used to fight. You used to want him. I studied her and realized she was scared. Not of me, exactly, but of a world where a woman could stop wanting a man and still survive. I used to want a version of him that doesn't exist, I said. And I used to want a version of me who would accept crumbs. I'm done with both. Her eyes glistened. If you stop, Gideon will. She swallowed the rest. I finished it for her. Notice you less? Liana flinched. That told me everything. Go home, I said, not unkindly. You can have him. I don't want the prize. I walked past her, leaving her in the theater's dim light, and felt the strangest relief. I didn't hate her. She was just another person trapped in a narrative she liked too much. A week later, Gideon actually requested, that I attend a Rowe Capital board dinner. That alone signaled trouble. Gideon didn't make requests, unless he needed something. I arrived in a tailored suit, hair smooth, expression neutral. The boardroom smelled like polished wood and expensive anxiety. The crisis unfolded quickly. A major fund threatened to withdraw, citing instability tied to Gideon's public image and rumored personal scandals. In other words, his romance headlines were costing him money. Gideon's jaw was clenched as he outlined a plan that relied mostly on intimidation and optimism. The older directors looked unconvinced. I raised a hand. The room stilled, surprised that the wife would speak. Your investors want predictability, I said. They don't care about love triangles. They care about risk. Separate personal narrative from corporate narrative. Announce a governance update, appoint an independent committee, and commit to quarterly transparency on exposure. Give them structure so they stop imagining chaos. One director leaned forward. And the tabloids? He asked. They're poisoning perception. Stop feeding them, I replied. If you must be seen in contexts that imply stability. Philanthropy, long-term partnerships, boring family values. A legal wife beside you looks boring. Boring is profitable. The director laughed once, delighted. Gideon's stare sharpened, then shifted into something grudging. They adopted the plan. The fund stayed. After the meeting, Gideon walked me to the elevator. Since when do you understand finance? He asked, voice low. Since I decided my life required it, I answered. Money is only protection if you know how it moves. He watched me with an expression I couldn't quite name. You used to spend, he said. Now you build. I pressed the elevator button and smiled faintly. Spending was Serena's attempt to feel valued. Building is my attempt to feel safe. The doors slid shut between us, and I felt the old story wobble on its tracks. Gideon had expected me to be a distraction. Instead, I had become an asset. That would make him curious. And curiosity in a man like Gideon could be dangerous because it carried ownership disguised as admiration. He tested that curiosity quickly. A day later, he sent flowers to my apartment, white lilies, the kind Liana liked. The old Serena would have melted. I sent them to the theater's dressing room with a note. For the stage crew, they work harder than the sender. Gideon called for the first time in months. Why did you return them? He asked, irritation masked as confusion. Because I don't accept gifts meant for someone else, I replied, and ended the call. At another event, a reporter asked Gideon whether he and his wife were reconciling. Gideon, perhaps out of habit, reached for my elbow to guide me. I stepped half a pace away so his hand met air. Cameras caught it. The next morning, the photo ran everywhere. Mrs. Rowe, avoiding her husband's touch. My therapist said, Good. Maya texted, Proud of you. Gideon sent a message that night. You made me look weak. I replied, You made yourself weak when you tried to hold me like property. Then a food documentary changed my evening. It featured an old noodle stall tucked in a narrow alley, the broth red as sunset, the beef tender enough to surrender without argument. My hunger did the math. I put on a hoodie and jeans and went hunting, following maps through streets that smelled like rain and fried garlic. The stall was perfect. Plastic stools, steam, the scent of chili oil and star anise strong enough to make my eyes water with joy. I ordered without hesitation extra beef, extra egg, double spicy. While I waited, a familiar voice floated from the next table. I didn't expect this, Liana whispered. The contract was canceled. It's my fault. Gideon's voice replied, controlled and cold. It isn't. I'll handle it. They looked absurd among the cramped tables, luxury in a place that didn't care. My bowl arrived, steaming like a promise. The owner called, "Miss, careful, it's hot." Gideon turned, and our eyes met. Shock flickered across his face. Liana's hand rose to her mouth. "Serena." I didn't greet them. I mixed my noodles and took the first bite. Heat hit my tongue like lightning, and I loved it. I ate with pure focus, as if the world had narrowed to broth, chili, and the thrill of being alive. Gideon kept staring. Liana tugged his sleeve. "We should go," she murmured. Gideon didn't move. He lifted a hand and called toward the counter with the authority he used everywhere. "1 beef noodle, same as hers, double spicy, extra egg." The owner shouted back, cheerful. "Coming up!" Liana looked at Gideon as if he had betrayed her in a language she couldn't translate. When Gideon's bowl arrived, he stared at the red broth like it was a dare. He took a bite. The spice hit him hard. His eyes watered real, involuntary tears, and his expression twitched in disbelief. I laughed, unable to stop myself. Gideon swallowed, coughed once, then said, almost accusingly, "You're enjoying yourself." "Yes," I replied. "That's the point." His phone buzzed. He read the screen and his face tightened. "We have to go." Liana stood quickly, relief flooding her posture. Gideon rose. But before leaving, he looked at me and said, "There's a charity cooking event next weekend. My grandfather wants the family to appear. Attend." I raised a brow. "Is that an order or an invitation?" His jaw flexed. "A request." He left with Liana clinging to his sleeve like a claim, and I finished my noodles, lips tingling, heart strangely calm. The charity event was meant to be harmless. Wealthy families competing in a televised cooking fundraiser, stirring pots while cameras captured smiles. Harmless didn't exist in my world. Gideon arrived with me for the first time in public, without Liana at his side. That decision alone generated whispers like sparks. Backstage, staff handed us aprons. Gideon looked at the cartoon vegetables printed on mine as if they were an insult. I tied it anyway. Across the room, Liana stood in a pale apron, surrounded by supporters who treated her like a saint. When she saw Gideon beside me, her smile wobbled. The host, eager for drama, asked Gideon on camera, "What's your secret ingredient?" Gideon answered with corporate smoothness, "Discipline." Then the host turned to me, "Mrs. Rowe, and yours?" I smiled into the lens. Spice and boundaries. Our assigned dish was noodle soup. Gideon froze. I grinned. Hand-pulled dough had become my therapy. I rolled up my sleeves and worked, stretching and folding with practiced rhythm. Gideon, to his credit, adapted, chopping ingredients with surgical precision. For 10 minutes we worked like a competent team, and the cameras captured something they hadn't expected. Not romance, but two adults doing a task well. Liana's station struggled. She kept glancing toward Gideon, missing cues, oversalting broth. When her bowl went out bland, the judge frowned. Then our bowl went out a bright aromatic broth, balanced heat, tender beef, noodles with chew. The judge's eyes widened. "Who made this?" he asked. Gideon looked at me. I looked at him. "We did," I said, and meant it. "We won." The prize was a donation. I directed it to the community theater's youth program on live television. June later sent me a voice message that was half laughter, half sobbing, and I replayed it until the warmth sank into my bones. After the cameras cut, Gideon approached me away from microphones. "You did that deliberately," he said quietly. "You made the public see you as something else." "I made the public see the truth," I replied. "I'm not your tragic wife. I'm a person with hands and skills and a life." His gaze held mine, heavy with something that might have been regret. "Liana says you're playing a game," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. "Liana likes games that have villains," I answered. "Without villains, she has to compete with reality." Gideon exhaled slowly. "My grandfather wants an heir," he said, as if the sentence were a law of nature. "He can adopt a cactus," I replied. "It requires less emotional intelligence." A sound like a laugh escaped Gideon, brief and startled, as if he hadn't meant to make it. Then his face closed again. "Do you want a divorce?" he asked, the word landing cleanly, dangerously. In the book, Serena begged not to be divorced because divorce meant losing her stage. In my life, divorce meant removing a collar I never asked for. "I want a contract," I said. "A clean exit. A fair settlement. No games." Gideon stared at me as if measuring the cost of honesty. Finally, he nodded. Name your terms. I spoke steadily. We announce an amicable separation after the year-end board cycle. We avoid public mud. You continue scheduled transfers until settlement. I keep my premarital assets and my businesses. You keep your company. We both stop pretending I'm a weapon you can aim. He was silent for a long time. The event's noise faded into distance. Then he said, Agreed. We didn't announce anything immediately. Gideon insisted on finishing the year-end board cycle before the separation became public, and I agreed for my own reasons. Timing affects contracts, stock confidence, and how much petty revenge Helena could squeeze out of a headline. My lawyer and Gideon's lawyer met in glass offices and exchanged documents like polite threats. Every clause was a boundary in legal clothing. Helena fought the settlement the way she fought everything, through pressure disguised as concern. She invited me to family tea in a private room at a luxury hotel, where the cups were thin and the words were sharp. You think you can leave with money and dignity? She asked, smiling without warmth. This family made you. I set my cup down carefully. This family borrowed my name for appearances, I corrected. And you are welcome to stop borrowing it. Then I slid a folder across the table. Projected media fallout, investor sentiment analysis, and a draft statement that framed the separation as a modern, respectful decision. You can fight this and lose control of the narrative, I said. Or you can cooperate and keep your social calendar intact. Helena's nostrils flared. For a moment I saw the woman behind the jewels, a strategist who hated being outplayed. You're not the girl we bought, she muttered. That girl is gone, I replied, and meant it in every possible way. Gideon's grandfather, the old patriarch who had once treated me like furniture, summoned Gideon and me to the estate. He sat wrapped in a shawl, eyes still sharp, and said, A Rowe marriage does not end for feelings. Gideon's shoulders went rigid. I answered before he could. Then let it end for function. We no longer function. The company needs stability, and stability requires honesty. The patriarch stared at me, offended by my directness, then asked, Do you love my grandson? I considered lying for convenience and rejected it. I don't, I said, and I won't pretend I do. Pretending would insult everyone in this room. Gideon's breath caught, a tiny sound that told me some part of him had hoped I would soften the truth. The patriarch looked from Gideon to me, then waved a hand like dismissing a stubborn chess piece. Fine, he said, but you will not ruin the Rowe name. I nodded. I'm not interested in ruining names, I replied. I'm interested in protecting my life. On the drive back, Gideon finally spoke. You didn't need to be that honest, he said, voice rough. I did, I replied. Honesty is the only thing that makes an exit clean. Lies leave hooks. He stared out the window at the city lights sliding by like slow rain. You're not afraid of us, he said, and it sounded like a confession. I'm afraid of patterns, I answered, so I refused to repeat them. News outlets tried to ignite scandal. We gave them a calm press release. Investors relaxed. Helena fumed. Vivian stayed away. Liana's expression on camera shifted from saintly to uncertain. Without a raging villainess, her story had less shine. She and Gideon drifted not with a dramatic breakup, but with an awkward quiet, as if they had been holding a pose for photographers, and suddenly the cameras had turned away. I poured my energy into things that paid me back. June's theater expanded. I opened a small noodle restaurant inspired by the alley stall, built around honest spice and fair wages. It became popular fast, then profitable, then fashionable. I hired staff who smiled because they were paid on time, not because they were afraid. Opening a restaurant with the Rowe surname still attached to me was like walking through a market with a bell around my neck. Everyone heard me coming, and not everyone liked the sound. Health inspectors arrived twice in 1 week, each time randomly. A supplier suddenly raised prices after receiving a call from an anonymous, concerned friend. An influencer posted a video claiming my broth was unsafe, and the clip spread faster than truth ever does. June wanted to fight publicly. Maya wanted to fight physically. I fought the way my old life trained me. Receipts, systems, and patience. I installed cameras in the kitchen, documented temperatures, kept records of every ingredient shipment, and invited the city's toughest food critic to sit at the counter and watch us cook. When he wrote that our kitchen was cleaner than most hospitals, and our broth could resurrect the dead, the influencer deleted her video in silence. The supplier issue was uglier. A man in a cheap suit visited the restaurant before opening hours and implied that, for a fee, the harassment would stop. He spoke like he was offering help. I asked him to repeat himself while my manager quietly recorded. Then I smiled and said, "Thank you, but I prefer to pay taxes, not extortion." He left pale. 2 days later, my lawyer filed charges, and the man's phone began ringing from places he couldn't ignore. Rumors pointed to Helena, but I didn't need proof to act. I set up a separate logistics chain, signed contracts with penalty clauses, and hired a compliance consultant who loved rules the way some people love perfume. I made my business too boring to sabotage. That kind of boredom is a weapon. The restaurant's success attracted investors who wanted to buy it, brand it, franchise it into something soulless. I listened, then refused. "If you want a machine," I told one glossy representative, "go invest in factories. I'm building a place where people can eat and breathe." He looked confused, as if he had never heard a woman speak about profit and care in the same sentence. Instead of selling, I expanded carefully. A second location near the university. A third in the arts district, with discounted meals for students carrying theater scripts. Every new lease was a small declaration. My future is mine, not borrowed. Gideon watched from a distance. He never ordered my staff to report to him, which surprised me. He also never apologized in public, which did not surprise me. When he came to eat, he sat quietly, paid the bill, and left without trying to reclaim familiarity. That restraint was new, and I treated it the way I treated a calm dog on a street. I respected the calm, but I didn't forget it could still bite. Leanna, however, couldn't stop circling. She appeared at the restaurant once with friends, laughing too loudly, then accidentally dropped her handbag so a lipstick rolled under my table. When I picked it up and returned it without comment, her smile trembled. She wanted a reaction the way some people want proof of love. Loud, messy, undeniable. A month later, she cornered me after a charity auction. "Why won't you fight me?" she asked, voice shaking. "Mascara perfect. If you hate me, at least hate me properly." I stared at her and realized she wasn't asking for war. She was asking for validation. In her story, she was the heroine only if I played villain. "I don't hate you," I said. "I don't have enough interest left to hate you." Her face crumpled with something like humiliation. "Then what am I to him?" she whispered. "A memory he uses as an excuse," I answered, gentler than she deserved and kinder than I felt, and an escape hatch he used when responsibility got heavy. She flinched as if slapped. For the first time, her tears looked less like performance and more like grief for a fantasy dying in her hands. That night, Gideon texted me. "Did you speak to Liana?" I replied, "Yes, I didn't attack her. If she's upset, it's because reality doesn't match her script." He didn't answer. Negotiations dragged on through winter. Gideon's lawyers tried to trim numbers. My lawyers returned the drafts with red lines that bled across the pages. Helena tried social pressure. Vivian tried guilt. Even the tabloids tried bribery, offering money for an interview about Gideon's abuse. I declined. I didn't want fame. I wanted closure. In a private mediation session, Gideon finally asked, "What do you want besides money?" The question sounded foreign in his mouth, as if he was trying a new language. I said, "A promise in writing that you will never touch me in anger again, and that you will not interfere with my businesses." He stared, then nodded. "Done." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, almost imperceptible, but enough to suggest he understood that this promise was not just legal, it was moral. After that, the paperwork moved faster. Without the hope of pulling me back into the marriage, everyone's hands stopped playing games. The settlement became a corridor with exits instead of traps. On New Year's Eve, June's Theater premiered the play we had been rehearsing for months. The opening scene featured a woman walking out of a gilded house and into streetlight, laughing as if she had finally stolen her own life back. June texted me from backstage. "I swear I didn't write this about you." I replied, "Liar." Then I cried in the dark, not from sadness, but from recognition. After the curtain call, the cast dragged me onto the stage for a thank you. I stood under warm lights, hearing applause that had nothing to do with a surname, and I felt the borrowed body I lived in become, finally, a home. Later that night, Maya and I sat on my balcony with sparkling juice and cheap fireworks popping in the distance. "Do you miss him?" she asked, pragmatic as always. I shook my head. "I miss the version of me who didn't know she could leave," I said. "And I'm glad she's gone." When the divorce finally became public after the board cycle, the shock was less dramatic than the tabloids had hoped. Investors yawned. Socialites whispered for a week, then moved on to fresher scandals. The world, it turns out, doesn't pause for anyone's heartbreak. That was a comfort. On the day I moved the last of Serena's belongings out of storage, old dresses, old love letters, old lies, I held a pale pink gown up to the light and felt nothing. I donated it to the theater's costume room. Let someone else pretend in it. I was done pretending. To celebrate the clean end, I went back to the alley noodle stall alone. The owner grinned and asked, "Double spicy again?" I nodded. The broth burned in the best way. Outside, the city kept moving, indifferent and bright, and I realized my greatest revenge was simple. I survived, and I enjoyed it. One evening, Gideon arrived at the restaurant alone and sat in the corner like a man visiting a world he didn't own. He ordered the spiciest broth and ate as if proving something to himself. When I walked by, he looked up and said, "You built this." "I did," I answered. "I like noodles." His gaze sharpened. "You never told me you wanted anything." I met his eyes. "Serena told you. You weren't listening. And I'm not Serena." He held the chopstick still. "Why didn't you destroy Liana?" "Because she isn't my enemy," I said. The enemy was the version of me who believed love was a cage and jealousy was a job. Gideon's throat moved as he swallowed. "I shouldn't have done what I did," he said at last. "You shouldn't have," I agreed, keeping my tone flat. "And you also shouldn't expect my forgiveness to be the price of your self-improvement." He looked away, and for the first time he resembled a man, instead of a title. Then he left without asking for anything, and I felt the last thread of obligation loosen. The divorce papers were signed in winter under a sky so bright it looked scrubbed clean. I wore sneakers and a simple coat. Gideon wore a suit, of course. We signed like adults finalizing a merger. When the final stamp hit the paper, the sound was oddly satisfying, like a lock clicking into place. Outside, cold air bit my cheeks, and I exhaled without flinching. My phone buzzed with messages that had nothing to do with men. The restaurant's second branch surpassing projections. A theater sponsor agreed